You are watching programming from the East-West Center in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to Yoichiro Sato in Japan. We welcome you to today's East-West Center in Washington webinar program. Delighted to have you, and thank you for participating. I know many of you are joining us from around the world at various times and on various platforms, so we welcome you. Today's program is, as you know, called Japan's Missile Defense Debates, a Multipolar World, Collective Defense, and Leadership Transition. And we have two extraordinarily well-informed experts who bring perspectives and previous research as well as government service to this topic. And we're delighted to have them. You know who they are, and I will introduce them momentarily. But first, just to reiterate our rules on the platform. Some of you are joining us by smartphone, some of you are joining us by live stream YouTube, and some on the Zoom platform. So today's program is recorded, is being live streamed, and you will be in the Q&A session, have an opportunity to offer questions, comments for the speakers to respond to. And I will be reading them, one, so they don't have to bother with keeping track of the dialogue, and I may be able to combine a couple questions, but also because the smartphone participants and the YouTube participants will not have access to these functions to be able to ask a Q&A, so to make sure they know what you're responding to. So let me introduce our speakers. We have two terrific speakers, as I said. Professor Yoichiro Sato is currently at Ritsumeikan University. He has an undergraduate degree from Keio and has studied extensively in the United States, doing an MA at University of South Carolina and a PhD at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. He's published a number of books which were in your invitation, the details of which are in your invitation, and has also been a faculty member in New Zealand at Auckland University. Our discussant today is, many of you will already know, is James Schroff. He is a senior fellow in the Carnegie Asia program and handles a huge number of issues on the U.S. Japan and Japan account, technology innovation, regional trade, security dynamics, well known in Washington circles and in Japan circles. And he has previously served in the Pentagon for the Office of the Secretary of Defense as a senior advisor for East Asia policy, where he undertook a number of initiatives related to North Korea, missile defense, and disaster relief, amongst other topics. He's also widely published. You have a full list of his publications, but particularly U.S. Japan technology coordination and tools for trilateralism caught my attention, and also very interestingly what Myanmar means for the U.S. Japan alliance. So he covers a range of issues related to the alliance and to Japan and to security issues. They are going to speak each for Sato. Professor Sato said he has a PowerPoint and will speak for, give or say, 20 minutes or so, followed by some comments from Jim Schroff, and then we will move to Q&A. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to our terrific speakers. Professor Sato, the floor is yours, and I will turn off my mic.
Thank you, Sato. It's very nice to be here and good to see you both. Thank you. Let me share the file first. Okay, so today I'll mostly talk about the domestic context because since the decision some 3 weeks ago, a lot have been said already, and I'm sure the audience in DC are quite, familiar with all those things. So I will try to not to repeat some of those discussions. And when the decision came on June 15, Defense Minister Kono announced that Japan is suspending, but which initially became canceling through the National Security Council discussion. And so the Aegis Ashore will not be deployed as it is. There are some discussions going on what should be the alternative platform and so forth, but so far, as far as the defensive asset is concerned, it's still inconclusive. And I very quickly responded to this by writing on Japan Times, and which I believe was one of the earliest in the English language publication. And I think it shows that initially the issue wasn't getting as much attention as it is now for various reasons. I think Jim can elaborate that on a little bit later. But anyway, several publications followed since then, and I think now the issue has become a big concern to some degree, but I think there are also optimistic assessment about where Japan is heading. So why did he cancel the Aegis Ashore in the first place? I think a lot are already said, and the official reason is the technical problems and the budget inflation. And there are some suspicious views about the technical issue that the booster may actually fall into the residential area when the interceptors are fired. And this point was already known to the decision makers, and it's strange that the government is bringing up this issue in order to cancel the deployment. But it's probably true that some of the technical issues were known, but at the same time, the Japanese government was not quite successful at persuading the local communities where the deployments were planned. So the cancellation actually did two things. One thing, it really embarrassed the LDP local politicians in those districts who spent a lot of efforts trying to persuade the local community leaders. But at the same time, the cancellation lifted the burden from the LDP members to pursue this rather unpopular decision. In a sense, that also applies to Prime Minister Abe himself. His popularity was already dropping, and pushing through with this unpopular decision was not a very popular thing. And because Kono decided to basically pick up this issue and do the cancellation, Abe could simply endorse it. And actually, it was reported that the Kono only consulted the Cabinet Secretary Suga and Prime Minister Abe, and other key members of the cabinet and the party were not consulted in advance. And particularly, this is important when it comes to the party secretary, Nikai. Nikai publicly pronounced his frustration at Kono for not being consulted on this very important issue. The cost inflations and development of newer types of missiles, which basically reduces the effectiveness of the Aegis Ashore system. Those are already reported elsewhere, so I'm not going to elaborate on those points. But the other thing is that the self-defense force has been forced to spend a lot of money on coronavirus responses, and it's putting pressure on the defense budget as well. But most importantly, the Kono's personal interests played a very big role in this decision. The Kono, personally, he is a very much an open type person. He likes open debate. He's not good at backdoor deal making and so forth. So for him, bringing this issue to the public is very important. And he is using this opportunity for greater visibility as well. And he hasn't hidden his intention to run for the LDP presidency sometime, and that means Prime Minister of Japan. He hasn't hidden his ambition. So this gave a great opportunity for him to pursue that. But interestingly, as I said earlier, he's not a backdoor deal maker, and he belongs to ASO faction, and ASO is one of the key sponsors of the Prime Minister Abe's cabinet. But ASO is not endorsing Kono as a successor to Abe or Prime Minister in general. So Kono's move is separate from the faction he belongs to. Okay, and so the technical issues are already discussed elsewhere. So I just put in some outlines, and maybe you can just take a quick look at the bullet points. But I'm not going to discuss these technical missile issues. The Chinese missile development is definitely interest for Japan. The missile defense was initially discussed in the context of North Korean threats, and the Japanese politicians were quite tight-lipped about the Chinese missiles, although informally they have always discussed China, but in public they never mentioned China. That's changing now, and the government officials are openly talking about the Chinese missile threats, and even Kono, in his answer to a journalist in an interview, the journalist asked him that the discussion about the strike capability of Japan might cause some the sensitive reactions from countries like China and Korea. And Kono, showing some really irritated face, and said that the very threats are coming from China's increasing missiles. So the Kono did mention, as an active defense minister, he put the missile defense in the context of growing Chinese missile threats. So the atmosphere in Tokyo has really changed on this point. The LDP created a project team on missile defense, and the project team with probably the members whose face look very familiar to you discussed this issue. And various opinions were exchanged, and there were some cautions expressed in the meeting, but the conclusion was very much a foregone one. And first of all, former Defense Minister Onodera, which is in upper right corner, he was named the chair of the project team, and he comes from Kishida faction. And Kishida is a designated successor to Abe, supported by both Abe and ASO, two mainstream factions within the LDP. So it's clear that the mainstream within the LDP is backing this discussion on counter-strike force as an alternative, or at least a supplement to the Aegis Ashore function. But the conclusion here is not very new. In fact, in response to the previous missile crisis originating from North Korean testing of newer types of missiles, the LDP actually already talked about possibility of introducing preventive strike capability, and the previous project team even recommended procurement of Tomahawk missiles. So, but the project team recommendation didn't become official policy back then. And the question is, will it become official policy this time? And the discussion mostly focused on the wording of this capability, and the preemptive strikes were not used in the end because of its connotation of first strike. So the recommendation clearly drew a line against any kind of first strike by the self-defense forces. So people are saying that we have to take the first missiles, whether we successfully shoot them down or some of them land on the ground targets, doesn't matter. We have to take the first strike. So unless first missile by the enemy is up in the air, Japan is not officially under armed attack. Therefore, any counter strike cannot be used yet. Okay? So that became the boundary of permissible counter-strike capability under the recent deliberation by the project team. So some analysts have already said that indeed this cancellation might lead to Japan's acquisition of counter-strike capability. And the legal discussions have already been set to permit that. So the remaining is the political will to actually adopt that as official policy. But my view is that it's not that simple. That political process is actually even more important. And there's a great chance that the recommendation by the recent project team may not be adopted as a government policy. So I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, here we go. Well, now the National Security Strategy document, as well as the 防衛力の計画大綱 that is the National Defense Program guideline. Both documents were scheduled to be reviewed by a discussion by the end of September. This calendar was not adopted after the announcement to cancel the Aegis Ashore, but the schedule was predetermined. So the question is, the discussion about the preemptive, or not, excuse me, preemptive is a bad word. The counter-strike capabilities going to be included in this revision or not. That is the current focus in Tokyo. So, but what comes next? This fall, there's a possibility that Prime Minister Abe will call a snap election. His popularity is reaching a kind of danger zone. In Japan, the cabinet support rate below 30% is a cause for resignation. A lot of party members will start calling for Abe's resignation if the popularity goes down below 30%. And everybody is denying, everybody in power is denying that we are going to have a snap election and it's not the time for it, and government should focus on the corona pandemic response and so forth. But in Nagatacho, in the political capital part of Tokyo, lying about the snap election is a kind of prerogative of politicians. So we shouldn't completely rule out that possibility. And if that's the case, whether LDP can secure the current strengths is going to be a very much of a focus, because everything is going against the ruling party now. The coronavirus situation is not going well. The economy is not being helped. And bringing up a controversial defense issue at the timing of election is not gonna be very smart for the Prime Minister Abe and the LDP leadership. And LDP's coalition partner, the Komeito, or the Clean Government Party, is also another issue. The party is not very happy about the prospect of snap election, and they have been trying to delay that as much as possible. But at the same time, they have made their preparation. So it's not that they're not ready. They already finalized the list of candidates for single member district where the party is going to run candidates. They have to make adjustment with the LDP because they don't want to have competing candidates shooting at each other within the single member district. So this adjustment has already completed in July. So we see that the Komeito is prepared. And there's also a ongoing talk with another party, the Nihon Ishin no To. The Ishin no To is led by the Osaka politician Hashimoto Toru. It's a conservative party based on Osaka area. And the possible coalition, including the Ishin no To, Japan Renewal Party in English, is also being explored by some key members of the LDP. I'll come back to that point in the end of the presentation. But if the snap election happens, who's going to be the next leader? It really depends on the outcome of the election. So the term for the current parliament is until October 2021, whereas term for Abe's LDP presidency is until September 2021. So Abe can call a snap election anytime between now and the September 2021. But a lot of factors favor doing it earlier rather than later. Yeah. Doing a snap election in a complete lame duck state doesn't really help. So ASO is very actively promoting earlier election. The Komeito is very cautious about going into this discussion about counter-strike capability. So while the LDP launched the project team to discuss this, Komeito actually refused to discuss the counter-strike capability at all. So there's no intra-party consensus within the Komeito what to do about this issue as a coalition partner. The issue is a potential coalition breaker in that sense. So if the LDP wants to go with this counter-strike capability, it has to be ready for a possibility of replacing the coalition partner. So how the LDP president gets selected? Yeah. If Abe doesn't dissolve the parliament, the LDP president serves as prime minister until September 2021. But then election will take place, and the term is for 3 years. And I will briefly explain how the presidential election will take place. In the current system, the 405 votes by the parliamentarians and the equal number of votes based on the popular party member votes will be tallied together, and whoever wins the majority in that round becomes the party president, as seen on the left side. But if there are more than 2 candidates competing and nobody wins a majority in the first round, then there will be a second round voting by 2 runner-ups. And in that process, the local votes become much less important, and the power shifts into the hands of the parliamentarian members. And parliamentarians, there are 405 of them who can vote, and the local votes in the second round will be tallied at the prefectural level. So each prefecture has 1 vote, and that 1 vote will be distributed by whoever wins the majority within each local prefectural unit. So what does this tell as far as the prospects of some of the candidates? Well, as I said earlier, if there is no snap election for the parliament, then the LDP presidential election will take place in September 2021, 1 month before the current term of the lower house ends. Yeah. So the new LDP president will immediately have to lead the parliamentary election, yeah, if that's the case. If the snap election takes place before September 2021, and if Abe fails to win enough seats for the LDP, he will come under pressure to resign. But in contrast, if Abe wins big in the snap election, which I must say is very unlikely, but then there is a possibility that LDP may change the rule for the party presidency selection and give Abe another term. Maybe not the full 3 years, but maybe additional bonus year, something like that. The possibility is very small now, but cannot be ruled out yet. And if neither happens, then Abe will serve the remainder of the term, and in between now and the end of Abe's term, various candidates will compete for succeeding Abe. So Abe's popularity is down and the prospect doesn't look good. The kingmakers here, they support Kishida. Aso is still looking for opportunity for a snap election to extend Abe's political career as a prime minister. But even LDP party members are not very favorable for giving Abe any kind of extension as LDP president. The key players are here, the Nikai on the left-hand picture and Suga at the lower right corner. Okay. They have made a very interesting alliance. They both were in a weak position earlier. Last autumn, Abe tried to replace Nikai as a LDP party secretary and place Kishida in that position. The position allows a lot of power in terms of allocating party's money and also the personnel affairs within the party. So Kishida is currently the head of the Policy Affairs Research Council, which is not as powerful as the secretary. And Abe tried to move Kishida into a more powerful party position to prepare him as a successor. Nikai survived that attempt and continued to sit as the party secretary. Suga, he also got in a weaker spot when some of the cabinet members and parliamentarians he promoted got implicated in the misuse of the campaign fund. But the issue has a potential to reach Abe because Abe authorized the funding of those politicians. And the Suga was protecting Abe through extending the term of the chief prosecutor. But then this chief prosecutor got caught by playing mahjong with his friends, betting money. So, so all these scandals weakened Suga's standing earlier. But the Suga came back in the end recently, and Nikai and Suga were working against Kishida. Suga doesn't like Kishida. Nikai is working with Suga, but he is also playing the kind of kingmaker role. So Nikai has not ruled out Suga. In fact, Nikai approached both Suga and Ishiba and playing between them. So these Machiavellians are making the prospect of succession very uncertain. I already mentioned about Onodera's role in Kishida faction, so I will kind of skip that. But the Kishida got weakened earlier when he, as head of the Policy Affairs Research Council, put together the corona response subsidy, and the party came up with the subsidy amount of 200,000 yen per family. But then Nikai approached the Clean Government Party and instead proposed 100,000 yen per head. So the Nikai Komeito proposal prevailed, and it really embarrassed Kishida's ability as a person who should be coordinating the party's policy. The Aso faction is trying to get rid of Nikai's influence, and the recent CSIS report implicating Nikai and Imai. Imai is the economic advisor to Abe, who is also very close to Suga as well. Nikai was implicated as a pro-China politician, and various information about him was reported. But the source of those information traced back to a journalist who's covering Aso faction. So there is a possibility that the domestic politics is played out in Washington, D.C. as well. Interestingly, the very active promoter of the counter-strike capability, Nagashima, joined the Nikai faction. And this has more to do with his re-election bid. He was placed in a really tough district because he just recently joined the LDP. He was in a Democratic Party before, so this is going to be his test as whether he can get close to a mainstream LDP or not. Ishiba is keeping distance from the counter-strike debate, and he's clearly looking at the local votes in the LDP president election. In the local votes, this counter-strike issue is not popular at all. So Ishiba's chances to sweep the local votes, 405 votes, because he cannot get enough votes among the parliamentarians. He doesn't play the faction politics very well. And if Ishiba can, however, win a lot of local votes. Last time he won 45% of the local votes against Abe. So Ishida is popular among the regular people, but not among the parliamentarians. Well, the other thing Nikai and Koike are working at is contain Koike. The Tokyo governor Koike has ambition to re-enter the national politics, and nobody wants Koike back into national politics. So Aso doesn't like that, Nikai doesn't like that, Suga doesn't like that. And this affects the prospect for snap election. The Tokyo governor election just happened. So if the national snap election is called now, Koike is not ready. So Aso wants to do it soon. But the others are not on the same tune, although they don't like Koike's return to national politics either. But Suga's doing everything to kind of put down Koike. And the most recent example is a travel subsidy to boost the economy. Citing the rising infection in Tokyo, Suga excluded the Tokyo residents from this subsidy. So it's very much of a political harassment going on. I think I should wrap it up. So just one point. The Kono's bid for LDP president may work both ways. He might cause a boom and strong contender, or he may just split the local votes with Ishiba and end up helping the mainstream candidates, Kishida. But another wild card is Suga himself. Suga has been exercising leadership in recent weeks, while Abe is really minimizing public appearances. So if Suga becomes a possible candidate for short-term relief by successfully putting together a new coalition with the Japan Renewal Party, Suga has ties with both Korean Government Party and Japan Renewal Party. So Suga Nikai putting together a kind of three-party coalition might really give a different leadership prospects. So with all these things going on in the domestic politics, the question is counter-strike going to be a main agenda at this timing? My guess is not. It's not gonna advance beyond the LDP, and the government will not do anything on this. That is my take.
Well, thank you, Yoichiro. It was fascinating. The actual missile defense issue now seems relatively uncomplicated after your description of the considerations of Japanese domestic politics, but I'll leave it for others to comment on that. Let me invite Jim Schoaf to make his comments before we turn to Q&A. Jim.
Great, thank you, Satu. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's a real pleasure to join the stage with Yoichiro Sato. I really appreciated the deep dive into Japanese politics. We were talking earlier that many of us who are used to go to Tokyo every other month or so are kind of starved for the inside politics, inside baseball of what's going on there. So I appreciated that. I'm just going to give a couple of big picture points, 4 big picture points, kind of from a Washington perspective, or at least my own personal view. Related to these issues, and I think they complement well the perspective of Professor Sato. First of all, overall, I think the timing of this major reconsideration of Japanese defense policy is not very good. It's very late in the game for the Abe administration. I think it's a real challenge for him to continue on beyond next year, if he even makes it that far. And we're really unsure about the US election. Are you going to have a kind of a anti-alliance destructive Trump continuing, or a brand new Biden team? So right now, to get into all these issues doesn't seem like great timing. Most politicians in Japan would have waited. They would have kept kicking the can down the road on the implementation. And here, I mean, I respect Taro Kono, Defense Minister Kono, because I agree with Professor Sato. He hears something that he thinks doesn't make sense and ought to be changed. Boom, he brought the issue out into the open. I think it's interesting that someone like Suga, who was very early on a part of the consultation and a potential rival for the presidency in the LDP, said okay. To some extent, some people see this as Kono trying to create a vehicle for him to gain public opinion and public support and support his candidacy. But as you'll see, there are no good options to deal with this issue. So it could also easily undermine him, because he could end up after 6 months without any good options and no real budget savings or way to deal with the challenges. So my second point, so number one, it's late in the game, not good timing. My second point is, I don't see a whole lot of need right now for big change in Japanese defense policy. I still think Japan's most effective approach is not to prepare to win an all-out war, with an adversary, but to make the use of force look clearly and completely unappealing. Limited gains for an adversary and high costs. And I think they do that by being a very large porcupine, very capable, but mostly a porcupine that, and keeping up a good friendship with a big wolf nearby to handle the offensive push. So you team with the United States for high-end confrontation, and you limit vulnerability, ensure some pain for the adversary to low-end competition, low-end conflict, cheap shots, etc. Or you want to buy time, as Onodera said the other day, you want to buy time until the United States enters in. So the third point I was going to make is that China is a significant problem in the gray zone and a major security risk or challenge for Japan. And that requires investment and alliance coordination to compete. But I still think the bigger high-end danger for Japan is North Korea. North Korea's nuclear missiles. They're more likely than China to test with cheap shots, and they're particularly dangerous if there's some kind of collapse or conflict scenario on the peninsula. I don't see an all-out war with China, especially one that Japan has to deal with on its own, being the major threat. So this leads me to my fourth point, which is this suggests to me the need to keep a robust missile defense in the mix for Japan's defense policy. And I think we ought to focus right now in the alliance on very high-level engagement to address this particular issue. The United States wants Japan to have a robust missile defense to help protect US bases and US citizens there. Japan does need some counterstrike capability, and they've already built that into their plan, even though, as Sato Sensei talked about, it's not as overt a part of policy yet, but they're buying the Joint Strike Missile, they're adding the JASSM extended range. That's up to a 1,000-kilometer cruise missile. You can improve coordination with the United States to be able for Japan to suppress potential further attacks until we can mobilize in the meantime. But I don't see any need to divert Aegis Ashore funding somewhere else into a strike capability that frankly has very politically dubious use in Japan. Yes, if you're being attacked by missiles, you're probably going to respond with some offensive approach, but Japan has not demonstrated a political or legal willingness to really stretch the limits of the use of offensive power. And who knows who's going to be prime minister down the line. So why not invest in missile defense that you know you will use if you are attacked in any shape or form? It's something that you can use in your defense. So they're going to have to explore technical solutions to this booster drop problem, whether that's engage on remote or engage where you put the radar up in the mountains and you keep the missiles down in the seashore or on ships at sea. You can't just buy more Aegis ships because you need more self-defense force personnel to staff them. They're expensive anyway, although they are more flexible, but they only reach a certain altitude. Onodera and others, the LDP committee is talking about engaging in the enemy's territory. So maybe there's some kind of missile defense boost phase, other types of things that could be looked at, but they're over the horizon, not available yet. So Aegis Ashore was supposed to provide a high altitude intercept capability and build a layered missile defense. They have Patriot batteries, they have Aegis ships, and then Aegis Ashore was supposed to extend that. Do you deal with, do you go through some kind of THAAD extended range approach? Or there's a variety of technical ways to go, but they all cost money. They all have deployment or base challenges similar to the Aegis Ashore. So I worry a little bit that, as Sato Sensei alluded to, everybody in Japan is kind of coming at this with a different agenda right now. There's no consensus. It's a politically difficult time, and you have COVID and other things. So to drive a consensus on this, along with broader defense policy issues in the alliance, is going to be extremely difficult. I would like to see Assistant Secretary, Director General, high-end, focused discussion on what do we do now to get Aegis or get robust missile defense improved in Japan, for the alliance, and then let's put on the agenda for next year to start at least maybe relooking at some of these balance roles and missions pieces within the alliance. But it's going to be a challenge. The challenge is there because of North Korea and China. I mean, these aren't made up problems just to spend money on new technology. So, but we have shared interests. We have good people in the bureaucracies and goodwill, I think, on both sides. So it's going to be an interesting time, and I'm glad you're having this discussion to keep this dialogue going.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was also extremely useful in addition to Yo's comments. Now, we only have approximately 9 minutes for the scheduled time, but we can run over a few minutes because you've given me permission prior to the start of the program. So let me immediately jump to the queue. Now, Yoichiro, I know you'll want to respond to those comments that, that Jim made as well, and I will give you a chance. But first, may I take a few questions from the Q&A function? So the first one that I see here is Susan Stahl asks, basically the question is, does this reflect the decision on Aegis Ashore reflect a larger opposition towards U.S. missile defense support and the overall U.S. Japan relationship? And, you know, will this spread to other issues? I mean, after all, the decision on this, there are other venues where U.S. Forces are. There are also other defense facilities. Might this spread?
Sure.
Both of you, yeah.
Question. Thank you, Susan. Good to hear from you. I think there are two issues here. One is about Trump's drive to renegotiate the host nation support. The Japanese side is being very polite, but the truth is they think they're getting ripped off. And that's really a honest view in Tokyo. And the other thing about the Kono's cancellation is he wants to see an improvement in the foreign military sales and the delayed delivery and the cost, you know, growing up, and all those issues are problematic. And now that Japan's spending more money on the more of the defense budget on the procurement of the U.S. systems, so Kono wants to see an improvement in that, and I think a lot of people on the U.S. side agree with that.
Jim, any comments on?
Yeah, no, I mean, what's really important is the view from Japan on this front. But my view is Trump has demonstrated that he's certainly not above extortion. He did it with the trade deal and this threat of 232 sanctions on Japanese automobiles, et cetera, basically demanding something. And that, I think that approach or that attitude is very dangerous in combination with these kinds of issues, these high-end technology, big budget programs. I think there's a much better chance for sorting this out with a Biden administration if he were to win. But I'm a little concerned. I mean, I don't see the decision as a reflection by itself in Japan of broad disenchantment with the alliance or uncertainty about the alliance. But it could go in that direction if this is not handled well. And we have the F-2 replacement program coming down the pike as well, which is a really important U.S. Japan co-development cooperation program.
Thank you. The next question is a question from Stuart Eales, I hope I pronounced that right. Is there any indication Japan might consider expanding Aegis afloat as an alternative to preemptive strike? Though I know you're not using preemptive, counter strike.
Yeah, I think it's one of the possible alternatives currently in discussion, but I think there are many other possibilities, and the discussion about the alternative, purely defensive capability will continue, and that goes in parallel to the discussion of counter-strike capability.
And one thing I might add here, I just think overall this underscores the need to keep the political side of the alliance management in the dialogue and discussion with the technical folks. We've got to combine that together. You can't just make a political decision, then pass it off and say, okay, you guys, the project managers, you carry it off. Because too many of these decisions and trade-offs need political accountability, but they also need the technical input to really understand what are the implications of different choices. Aegis Afloat has some positives, but it also has other challenges that have to be balanced against other options.
There was another question about this, but I think you've answered this in the question, so I'll move on and we can come back if need be. Jeff Horning asks, where do U.S., and I'm not familiar with this acronym, GBIR, so one of you will know the acronym, so you can, when your response, please spell it out for those of us who don't. Where
I think that's ground-based intermediate range.
Okay.
Potentially ground-based intermediate range.
Okay, where do U.S. ground-based intermediate range missile capabilities fit in this? Why do you think this has dropped off the radar when it addresses what Japan essentially needs and would fit well within alliance confines? Either of you? Any of you? Both of you?
Well, yeah, and I apologize to Jeffrey if I'm mistaken on that on that acronym, but I mean, this is a very real question in terms of some people in Washington wonder if some folks in Tokyo, when they talk about counter-strike, are they really talking about not just cruise missiles, but ballistic missile development and developing their own ability to strike back that way. Of course, the US would probably say, you don't need to develop your own ballistic missile. We have plenty. We're building a whole bunch now because we don't have the INF treaty out there anymore. Just give us a place to put them in Japan and we'll take care of it. But to me, that's way down the line. I think politically, cost-wise, foreign policy related, I know South Korea's improving its missile capability and trying to keep up with North Korea, but I think we have other options to deal with both the defense and the offense than jumping into ballistic missiles.
Yoichiro Sato, do you have any
So,
thoughts?
yeah, I think deploying those missiles, especially nuclear-tipped ones on the Japanese soil, is just way beyond what's politically possible. I think U.S. needs to work with Palau on that.
But I think Jeffrey's point is probably was not thinking about nuclear, but yeah, point taken. That's some people would immediately jump to that.
Yeah, and he said he has written in the Q&A section that no, I don't mean nuclear. Neither does US. I thought as much. So that seemed to me, and that kind of answers another question we have from a Miss Morales about Japan's nuclear policy, but you've kind of answered it, that as Yoichiro said, that's way far down political feasibility in any near time frame. So let me run to Bryce Wakefield's question. He writes, could you explain what you mean by legal willingness to use counter-strike capabilities? And Yoichiro, that caught my attention too. You mentioned it specifically, that there was a legal element. And then you referred to the upcoming NDPG and the NSS as unclear whether they would, if I understood you correctly, and perhaps I didn't, that it wasn't clear those two documents would include counter-strike. So I had the similar question, and Bryce goes on to say, I'm sure there are people in Japan who claim that such capabilities are unconstitutional. The deterrence tailored to the capabilities of possible adversaries has been recognized as legal since at least the 1950s. Is there a debate on this in Japan as it regards the Constitution? So maybe you could distinguish that legality versus policy.
Just on that front, I think I was the one who used legal and political, or legal willingness. And by that, it alludes to, and I'd be interested in Sato Sensei's answer to this. I think the legal room or the legal question is far from completely settled. Although personally, I agree with the interpretation that you should be allowed to strike an enemy base after it's hit you as a way to suppress for self-defense, and that's been the policy approach. But whether that's a legal willingness, is one question. And then within that, once you decide what's really legal or the consensus of what's legal, then you have the political choice of whether you do it or not. So to me, there's kind of two elements of that, but other people might say, no, Jim, it's the legal question is settled. It's really a political question.
Professor Sato, your thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, the 1950s, the cabinet positions has been, in the background all these years, and LDP has not, moved back from that. And if anything, the more clarity has been added to that position. And so currently Japan is refraining from, the massive retaliatory capability, that means nuclear capability. And that is the US role within the alliance framework. But what Japan is talking about is yesterday there was a webinar, and Onodera commented that if North Korea attacks Japan, and the US will enter a discussion, and the domestic process, the president making decision and communicating with the Congress and all that, it will cause one day of delay in Onodera's view. And within that one day, can Japan be just sitting and waiting and taking more missile attacks from North Korea? Or can Japan try to minimize the further attack by North Korea by using some counter-strike capability? And things like that is being discussed as a possible policy option within what's legally permissible.
Well, I know we are at 7:02, but is there any specific element of the four comments that Jim Shof made, Professor Sato, that you'd like to respond to as our guest who got up early in Japan to join us this morning? You'll recall Japan's not good timing, no need for such a big change. DPRK still remains the real high-end problem. And you need to keep missile defense in the mix. So would you like to kind of close out on responding to Jim Shof's?
Sure. Actually, one of the point Jim mentioned that the technical people and policy people need to sit together and discuss this. I totally agree with this. And actually, that is the very reason I wrote the Japan Times article in the first place. I wanted that process to start.
So am I to understand that the decision making on that led to the June 15th, I guess June 15th, you said, that there was not prior consultations with Washington in making that decision? There was no, was there a mechanism or a venue or any heads up given? I wasn't clear from the press coverage whether there was just a total shock or there were some inklings or some signaling or some messaging through private government channels.
As far as I can read through the Japanese media reporting, that there was no official consultation. There was no intended communication. Some words were leaking. There are some indications of that, and the US side was trying to inquire what's going on, but the corner was not answering those.
I see. Well, I am quite certain that there will be more on this, because there has to be more on this now that this decision has been made, and the outcome of US elections and the move towards Japanese ones, whether they're SNAP or September 2021. So stay tuned. We have two wonderful experts joining us today, and I want to thank them very much for your excellent remarks, very useful for our understanding in addition to the press reporting. I do want to flag for participants who are joining us, whether by phone, YouTube, or on Zoom, We have a number of very interesting programs coming up throughout the month of August and into September, and I hope you'll be able to join us. If you wish to get on our listserv newsletter, please do so. And Ms. Wang can put a list of upcoming programs for you on the chat function. With that, again, let me thank Professor Yoichiro Sato from Ritsumeikan University, Mr. Jim Shoaf from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and all of you, wherever you are, please be safe, be healthy, and thank you once again for joining the East West Center in Washington's webinar series. Good day, good night, good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you for great questions too.
Yeah.